Hello and welcome to C-Suite Secrets. I'm Heather Parsons, your host, a serial entrepreneur, fractional CFO, and a business value strategist. I've spent years juggling business and family life while helping entrepreneurs scale, optimize cash flow, and build real financial success. On our show, we bring you real conversations with founders, executives, and operators about what actually moves the needle in business. No fluff, no filler, just smart strategy, systems that work, and insights that you can put to use in your business right away. With that, let's dive right in. Today on C-Suite Secrets, I'm joined by Amber Fields. Amber, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Heather. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so glad to have you. For those who may not be familiar with you and what you're working on, I would love it if you could give us an introduction and tell people a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so I am Amber Field. I currently am the COO at an AI startup called Strudel AI. We're aiming to make debugging obsolete for programmers. But I have spent my entire career in tech. So I've been everything from an engineer at IBM, that was my very first job, to a project manager and head of the PMO for a startup called OPower that was later acquired by Oracle. I've run the operations for Capital One's Innovation Lab in the DC area. And most recently, before this job, I was the vice president of engineering and product at a company called SingleWire Software that made mass emergency notification systems for schools and hospitals. So I have been on the operations side, either on tech or overall, for a very, very long time. And my specialty is really making things run really well and scaling.
I love that. Sounds like you have had an amazing career and are doing a lot with startups and really moving the needle forward with them. So, what do you think as you've moved through these roles and done all of this work in tech? What role has shaped how you operate today the most?
Oh, that's probably an easy answer, actually. So I spent a good chunk of my career being a project manager, boots on the ground, working with teams, working with engineers and product managers and UX folks to get things done. And I think that role has taught me so very much about how to maybe not distract your teams from doing too many things, how to make sure that the most important things are getting done. How do we make sure that teams are working well together and that you build a great team that really enjoys what they do and therefore performs much better? And so I think that's really shaped, especially since I started doing that I didn't even mention this, National Geographic was my second job. I've been
Nice.
using those skills ever since.
That's great. And I think that's wonderful. That's something as founders and operators, a lot of people really struggle with because you have to wear so
Mhm.
many hats and not being a bottleneck is a difficult thing to do.
Absolutely.
So, also going from large corporations to more of an early stage startup, what are some of the things that you've
Mm.
had to unlearn as you made that move?
Oh, yes. I think the biggest thing of going from a large organization where you have tons of people to delegate to a smaller one where if you want something done, you kind of have to do it yourself is, learning to take action a little bit faster. Before I spent a ton of time thinking about how I would communicate to the team, make sure they were working on the right things. And now there's a little bit less of that I need to do and more of, okay, let's put on our boots, let's get moving, let's just do this thing, we'll do it today, and then tomorrow we'll have some new problem or solution to work on. That's I think that's been the hardest piece for me, is just thinking about, okay, we have something to do, now it's probably me that's going to have to do it.
Right. That's a truth I believe that most
Yeah.
entrepreneurs can definitely feel. So, that's a lot going on right there. So I know you work on multiple projects, you're working with Strudel
Mhm.
AI, doing lecturing, all sorts of things. How do you balance the operations across multiple endeavors as you're working on things?
Yeah, that's a good point. And even I in my intro forgot to mention, on the side for many years now I've been lecturing at the University of Wisconsin and I teach their computer science capstone course. So I'm doing that. I'm an author. I'm writing my second book right now, in addition to Strudel AI. So for me, it's all about time boxing and making sure that I have the right time of day set aside for the right type of task. Personally, I know that I have the most energy to do things in the morning. So I have I tend to try to schedule my most important task, whatever that might be. Sometimes that might be working on something for Strudel AI, doing some hiring. Sometimes that might be sitting down and getting a chunk of the book written that I'm working on right now. So whatever that is, I typically block off the first 2 hours of my day for my quote unquote most important task. And then I leave the afternoon for things like meetings, smaller tasks, things that I don't need to really focus on quite as much. And so for me, a typical day might look like a couple hours blocked off for writing, a couple hours blocked off for class prep, and then the rest of the day and beyond for, anything else that I might need to do from an operations perspective, including and most often meeting with people and making sure that everyone's on the same page.
I love that. Time blocking is a huge deal for me as well. So I love hearing how other people are making things work. One other question I have around that is, how do you decide what deserves your attention whenever everything feels important?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I don't typically do anything special. Like, I don't use the Eisenhower matrix or anything like that, but I take a look at, like, what do I if I get to the end of the day and I haven't gotten this thing done, what's going to make me feel the worst? What's going to hang over my head basically and keep me up at night if I haven't gotten that thing done? And typically that question will drive me to find the thing that's most important for me. So I've used a trick that I learned from the Make Time book by John Zaratsky and Jake Knapp, who also had a book called Sprint. So they're from Google Ventures, and they came up with the Google Design Sprints, and they've got another book that's great and filled with a lot of practical tips. But they said, come up with your highlight of the day, just one thing that if you got that thing done today, you'll feel really good about your productivity for the day. And that's kind of what I've been doing, is thinking about what is that one thing that at the end of the day, if I'm not done with it, I'm just, I'm going to want to keep working on it until it's done. I want to be able to go home. I want to be able to have dinner with my family. What do I need to get done today that I will feel really good about?
That's fantastic. I hadn't heard of that book, but that's definitely something I'll be adding to my reading list. I do a lot with X is easier than 2X, and making sure that I do my top three, and looking backwards as well. I know it's entrepreneurs and people who are busy in business, celebrating wins and looking backwards is usually not our biggest strong suit.
True.
But I think it's really helpful. So digging in a little bit on the early stage startups, whenever businesses are forming and they're really trying to get off the ground, what operational work actually really matters the most to them, and what looks important but really isn't?
Yeah, so I have an opinion that maybe not everyone will agree with, but I have a pretty strong one. Given that my background is in tech, what I've noticed is with the smaller startups, all of them have been in tech. I think that the things that distract the business more often than not early stage is marketing and sales work. I feel pretty strongly that if you focus on your product, you make it really well, you make it something that people can't live without, the marketing and the sales is going to follow. Obviously, I'm very biased, having kind of grown up on the tech side of things, but I think that many of the very successful businesses today, especially on the tech side, would agree. They sit down, they're singularly focused on getting this, solution to a problem that they know their customers are feeling viscerally done. And they'll get a few customers on the platform, and those customers will kind of take it forward for them. And yeah, of course, you got to do marketing, you got to do sales, and you have to do everything else that comes up, finance and all that stuff. But I just really feel like if we focus more on the product side of things, whatever we're selling, whatever problem it is that we're solving for our customers, that's going to kind of make everything else easier or unnecessary in the long run. So that's kind of my philosophy in terms of this early stage piece, is figuring out what is it that's going to make everything else easier, and then kind of focusing on that.
That's a very fair point. I could see where some people may disagree with that, because I know getting to that first $3 million mark is a lot about sales and how you position your product. But I love that you're talking about really solving the problem that your customers need, right? So with that being the primary focus and, maybe sales and marketing not being so high on the list, how do you balance that out whenever all of these discovery calls are coming in and that's
Yeah.
something that people are spending a lot of their time on, not just the
Yeah.
development work?
I love discovery calls because they basically take care of both sides of the fence, right? So you're doing it from a product perspective so that you're learning what are the pain points of your customers, what could you build for them? It's helping you figure out what your roadmap is. But then at some point you've basically validated that yes, your customers or potential customers have these problems. And those calls end up turning into sales pitches. And I have no problem with that because I think that's kind of the brilliance of the discovery call is you get to know your various customers, you get them excited about the product that you have, and then at the very end of the call, they're dying to try it out, and you can kind of flip the switch and turn it into a sales call. And so to me, I think that's a great route to sales in and of itself. It gives you a ton of data, it gives you a ton of feedback, but then you're able to hopefully make a sale at the end or get someone on a beta wait list or something wherever whatever stage you're in. I think it's beautiful, and that's just because traditional sales and marketing gives me a little bit of hives. Like that's the route I want to take for sales, right? I want customers to feel that value, and then the conversation gets much easier after that because you can then just say, well, we've got a solution, you want to try this out? Great. So, that is something that I think fits the bill for both sides and, is kind of just a win-win.
I couldn't agree more. Talking about sales and how people handle that, whenever it feels like I agree with you completely on the sales and marketing kind of gives me hives whenever it feels salesy. So,
Exactly.
yeah. So, what do you think as founders start doing these discovery calls outside of being, a used car salesman? What are some of the mistakes that you see founders making during these discovery calls?
I think, leaning into the pitch early. So the very first second that you hear something that resonates with you from a customer, instead of asking your full set of questions or continuing to kind of dig into what's going on in their environment with their teams, you immediately kind of flip to, oh, we've got something that will solve that problem. And what happens when you do that is you miss out on a plethora of other interesting ideas, because in discovery calls you really want your customers to be talking most of the time. You want them to give you as much information, even if it seems extraneous at the time. You never know when it's going to be something that you need to pivot to. And so I just, to me, that's the first and most important thing that comes to mind in terms of like the mistakes that we make on those calls, not letting them rattle on, not leaving space for customers to fill in the blanks and pop in with more information is another big one. We're humans, so when we're excited about what we're building and we want to just keep talking about it, but really we need to be almost silent in those discovery calls and just dig in where we need to dig in. Uh, and so I think that's a skill that takes, I know with myself, it's taken quite a bit of training. And when I was at Capital One Labs, that's one of the things that we trained on specifically was making sure that we were asking the right questions, the right open-ended questions, and then shutting up and listening to the people that we're interviewing so that we could find out as much as we could.
I love it. That shutting up part is hard to do for a lot of folks. I know I run into that myself sometimes. So it's
Absolutely.
definitely a good reminder that, as I told one of my kids this past weekend, you have two ears and one mouth. Let's kind of keep it that way. Okay? I
Yes.
think the lesson is still here for a lot of us. So as you're working with, gathering all of this information and really working on delivering the best product possible, how have you really leaned on agile software development to
Mm.
help you while running, Strudel AI operations?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I kind of gravitated toward the software team when I first got there to dig in on, all right, how are we working? Not necessarily what are we working on right now, but how are we working? How could we possibly improve that? Could we incorporate some sprints, which is from the agile world software? We work in like usually 1 to 2 week chunks with a distinct goal, get that done and keep moving so that we can get work out as quickly as possible to our customers and iterate on that. So I dove into that a little bit. We got the roadmap in place. We incorporated some stand-ups throughout the week, which is another kind of normal thing that I think most of us are familiar with stand-ups, even in the executive world. We've adopted that. Those have been very useful. But then looking at everything else that we needed to do, I'd kind of combine the idea of sprints and time boxes and think about, okay, I know we need to set up, our financial platform this week. Like, let's make that the singular goal, get that done, and then move on to the next thing instead of trying to start a bunch of things and then never finish them that week. I found myself kind of naturally saying, all right, we've got to get the financial stuff set up. Okay, we've got to hire. In our case, we hired some students to help us with social media right off of the bat. We're in Madison, Wisconsin, so we have great access to students from the University of Wisconsin. So we'd hire them, get that done. Great. Now we've got to train them. And just kind of having that goal every single week has really helped us move forward without starting a bunch of things and not stopping them. Finishing them, I should say.
Right, exactly. I love that you're using students as well. I think that is something that startups and businesses should definitely lean in and leverage more of, because that's how a lot of these students get experience and figure out where they want to go in their career, whether it's marketing, technology. We also look at that heavily in the outdoor space. Whatever you have a need for, there's probably a student somewhere that could use some credit for that,
Yep.
along with a little pay. So you can find a way to meet both of your needs pretty easily there with just a couple of conversations. So I love that you all are doing that, and we'll definitely have to dig more into that later. So whenever I'm looking at the agile process, speed and iteration seems to get really complex whenever you start adding AI into the mix.
Oh, yes.
So how important is AI for early stage startups, and when does it become more of a distraction than a real benefit?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I can't imagine running a startup without AI right now because we have to move so quickly, especially in the world. So we're a AI startup using AI, but everyone in the world is trying to start up an AI company right now. And so for us, speed is of the utmost importance. So anything that we can do to move faster is a benefit to us. Within Strudel AI, we're using AI almost everywhere that we possibly can. And that includes writing job descriptions. That includes having a project in Claude. That was one of the first investments we made, was the latest instance of Claude, getting everyone on that, giving it as much information about the company and what we're doing as possible so that we could, anytime we're writing anything for fundraising, to go on the website, marketing, whatever that the case may be, everyone's kind of working together in this singular project to, have the best output as we possibly can. Where does it become a distraction? I I think one of the articles I really like that I've read recently is called "Keep the Robots Out of the Gym." And I can't remember. I think it was Daniel, and I'm super bad with names, so his last name is something like Messler or something like that. I've heard of him before, and basically he argues, for the things where just the output matters, it's really important to use AI because you just want to get to the output as quickly as possible. And AI is really good at what it does. Let's just be honest. It can write better than me. And I've written a book and I'm working on another one, right? But for things like going to the gym, where what you're trying to do cannot be replaced, like the whole point is for you to lift those weights so that you get stronger, you should not be using AI for things like that. So if there's something where you want to grow your skills, whether it's writing or it's marketing or it's getting better at planning, could AI help you? Of course. But if it's taking over so that you're not growing those skills, then that's not a place where you should be using it. You should not use it for kind of your core secret sauce, your core functionalities, your things that like only you can really bring that essence to the table, if that makes sense. So I think it's a little bit of an art to figure out where to employ it, right? And there's going to be a little bit of trial and error. And I think we're going to go through a whole bunch of years where I think all of the industries are just struggling to figure out where are we going to incorporate AI and where are we not going to. But at the moment, I would say I tend to lean in on using AI first if I can. And then if I find that it's taking too long or the output isn't as good or something like that, then you remove it and you just move forward yourself.
I agree completely, especially around with using AI for things like going to the gym. I was talking to a friend about this earlier this week around, AI is not a replacement for your brain. It is not,
Yes.
like you still need to be able to think critically. It's amazing for refinement. It's amazing for speeding up processes. But at the end of the day, people are still the secret sauce in business.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the more we start using AI in that vein, the better of a tool it is. The more we get the speed and the output that we're looking for, but we also keep our humanness to go along with it. Because that's where I
Yeah.
think people, as we go forward with AI, people still want to do business with people, not with bots,
Absolutely.
not with AI, but real people that they can pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I've got this going on. How can you help me?
Yeah. And I think if you think about it, you can brainstorm with a bunch of people in the room and your ideas will get better. You can also brainstorm with a bunch of people in the room and AI and your ideas will get better. But
Right.
ultimately, you're the ones that have to pick, which of these ideas are we actually going after? And what's the data that we're looking at that tells us that this is the right direction? I don't trust AI to make that decision for me. And I don't think any of us should.
Absolutely. And that also causes me to think of another point, AI with the
Mm-hmm.
hallucinations and
Yep.
it likes to make things up. I ask AI to help me with a math problem around this new 50-year mortgage that's coming out. In
Uh-huh.
general, I already knew the answer to the problem, right? I already knew the answer. But whenever I ask it the question, the answer was wrong. I
Uh-huh.
as a finance professional, I knew that. But somebody who was just asking in general that doesn't have that background, they may not know that that answer is wrong. So we have to be really careful with what we ask and that we put at least some checks and balances in place so we know what we're getting.
Absolutely. And I think, if you think about it with software developers, you've got senior developers that are really good and really know their stuff and are the ones who can tell that the AI is spitting back an incorrect answer. And you've got junior programmers that sometimes know. It's still important to have that interaction with the various seniorities within your company and with AI in the mix to make sure that those junior employees actually realize that what's happening is wrong and why, so that they can continue to learn too. I think the thing that scares me the most about what's going on right now is a lot of companies have paused hiring of their junior developers and employees, and their senior employees are getting older and older, and like, what is going to happen with that gap in between where you don't have people coming up with those same critical thinking skills? That's going to be interesting to watch.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that with AI is a little bit different than the .com era. Whenever we
Mm-hmm.
had .com and back in the early 2000s and then the 90s, everybody was kind of learning together.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit different because we have people who are, have a lot of the skills needed to really make AI work and productive, which is why some of these newer businesses are going to be so great. But then to your point, we still have to bring our younger people along and junior members of the team so that we don't lose that historical knowledge.
Yeah, and there's a concept in computer programming called pair programming where you're programming together in pairs of two. And it's great for bringing new people on board because they can learn very quickly from a senior developer, for example. I still think that concept is really works very well in all parts of the business where you could be pairing a senior person with a junior person still today to make sure that those skills transfer. And it ends up not taking twice as long to do the thing because you've got two people working on it. Most of the time, it maybe takes 15% longer to do something if you stack up that person, both people's time in a row. But you end up coming up with a product that's so much better. So you get fewer bugs and you end up saving time in the end, which I just find fascinating.
I love it. I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
great thing for all entrepreneurs to think about, especially if you are going to use resources that are still in school or maybe new to the
Mm-hmm.
workforce. You also mentioned bringing on Claude, which is definitely one of my
Yeah.
favorite AIs. So, as you all are looking at tools and as you think about implementing AI, how do you determine and vet these tools to figure out what would work best inside an early stage business or in most businesses?
Yeah. Um, we do a lot of trial and error. So, maybe signing up for a month and seeing how this tool actually works. I would say none of the tools that we're picking up are things that we've just found on our own. So we've got a big network, all of us founders, of other people in our space that we're constantly talking to. And we've got discovery calls going on all the time. So we're hearing about different tools from people that we trust. And so that kind of goes a long ways into us helping to figure out, okay, is the ROI there on this tool? Did I hear about it from someone who I trust? And that sort of thing. But we do a lot of trial and error and then getting rid of the tools that aren't working and keeping the ones that are.
That's great. I think the whole getting rid of the tools that aren't working is where I see, in big business in particular, and every small business that I've ever worked with, there is definitely a long list of software and tools that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be gone through on a regular basis. If you're not looking at that at least every 6 to 12 months, you're probably leaving money on the table that you could be putting in your pocket. So I think that's a very smart move there. So, and as you're looking at these tools, so what do you think is more of a force multiplier versus just shiny new tech that people are looking at?
Oh, yeah. Cloud definitely for us has been very, very useful to have around. For developers, Cursor has been what I'm finding that most people are finding. That and Claude Code is what a lot of people are using today. And then there are a bunch of little companies that are coming out of the woodwork that, I think the jury is still out on them. I guess going back to your other question, a lot of what we're trying are the technologies associated with some of these bigger companies because we kind of trust them a little bit more to have vetted this and to have acquired well and that sort of thing. And so I think, that's something you have to keep in mind in terms of what you take on is how is this tool going to be supported long term? Is this a little company that's just going to be snatched up by someone that you don't want to work with in the future? Or is this something that is already owned by, Google or Microsoft and you have a partnership that you've already got? So you may as well jump on and use the beefed up version of Gemini, for example. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting fun navigating this. And as a small startup ourselves, we're finding that that's one of the biggest questions of our customers is, what does your security look like? So part of vetting your tools is we're going through SOC 2 right now from a security perspective, and you have to make sure that all the internal tools that you're using are also secure. And so that kind of helps us weed out some right there. But they're also wondering, what's your longevity look like? What's your runway? How long are you
Yeah,
going to be around? Because if I'm going to go through all of the time and effort to bring you on, I want to make sure you're going to be there and be useful for the long term.
absolutely. And I think those are some really fair questions, especially as we see new businesses entering the AI market every single day. Security for
Mm-hmm.
me is definitely one of the hot topics and the most important things that I'm looking at whenever I look at AI tools, because at the end of the day, there's a huge cost associated with a breach or anything that could happen
Mm-hmm.
around one of the products that we use. So, in looking at that from more of a financial lens, how do you see founders trying to balance out whenever they're ready to spend money on some of these tools versus, their budget and what really
Mm-hmm.
matters as they go forward?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the quintessential question. We just did a fundraise, a pre-seed fundraise, and so it felt, I see a lot of founders raise a bunch of money and say, "Oh, we're rich. Let's go ahead and try out all these tools." And I don't necessarily think that's the right move because there's so many other things that you could spend money on. So when I do budgeting, I think through what are my various categories, how much of this do I want to set aside for these tools, and then what's the highest priority within that, and then kind of go down. I think that a lot of early stage folks. spend a lot more on tools than they probably need to. I'm a big fan of starting small and then like keeping things simple and then continuing to add where it actually makes sense. But I've seen a lot of people get in trouble with just trying out all the new shiny things because they think that they need to do that in order to move as quickly as possible, when really a more simplified tool set might actually be something that would help you move forward.
I like that, and I agree in a lot of regards. For me, it's a lot about tying back to the business case. If we know that we're trying to grow and the way we grow is through people, then setting aside a much bigger budget for, hiring talent and moving that forward works great. I think it all depends on what your intentions are and how you want to satisfy that new business need as you scale up.
Well, I think that's the key, is sitting down and deciding intentionally what you want to spend your money on. I think there's a lot of businesses that don't do that as well as they could, but this is a great time of year for businesses to sit down and say, all right, these are my OKRs. These are my values. This is what I care about. And then setting aside money accordingly. It's money and time, really, that's really going to tell you what a business cares about. You might think your values are X, Y, and Z, but if you look at your calendar and you look at what you're spending money on and it doesn't align, then that tells me everything I need to know about your business in terms of what your values actually are.
Absolutely. It's what we do, not what we say.
Yep.
So love that and really agree. So looking back, as you've worked with all of these companies, what operational or finance mistakes do you wish that founders would avoid before they feel the pain?
Ooh, yeah. Um, Well, I think that ties in with the last question. So, getting really clear on what you're trying to do. So, for me, that is, what problem are you trying to solve? Who are you trying to solve it for? And then building a team and a roadmap around that. And then adding on the other things that you need. You're obviously going to need to tell people about what you're doing. You're obviously going to need to be reaching out and finding more people to help you with discovery calls and or selling your product to if you've got a mature product. But thinking through some of these things ahead of time can really save you a lot of time and pain and money. And so that's always kind of been my style. Doesn't always jive with the startup world, where it feels like we have to react here and there and everywhere. But I do think that even in the startup world, there is a place for planning, thinking ahead, and being able to say no to things that come up. Even though it feels like you should go off and try to get that last 50K from this other person, maybe your time actually is better spent doing these discovery calls so that you've got a decent product, so that your next round of funding will be even better. And so I think taking the time to think through that and be focused, to me, is the most important thing.
I really agree with that. Being any time that you can be intentional in your business, I think that is a seed that's planted that continues to bear fruit as you go along. Well, today's conversation has been great. So before we wrap up, I only have one final question. I would love to know, what is one secret that you wish you would have known starting out in business or as an entrepreneur?
Oh, one secret. Let's see. I wish I would have known how important it was to keep in contact with the people that like really were my champions in my career throughout. We didn't talk about relationships very much in this conversation, but I think that it's a good aspect to really focus on too. If you've been in a bunch of different businesses, you've got a lot of different contacts and a lot of different people that know how you work, what you do well, what you don't do well. And if you move around geographically, it can be really tough to keep in touch with those people. But especially when it comes to starting your own company, having that network and making sure that you're keeping up with those folks is so, so very important. So I wish I had done a better job and known how important that would be later in my career, and started earlier and making sure that I did some regular reach outs to the people that I really love to work with, or that really appreciated working with me, and just kind of keep those relationships up to snuff, so that when we want to do discovery calls, you've got people to reach out to, and who are happy to jump on and give you their opinion.
That's some great advice. Thank you so much. And before we wrap up, if our listeners would like to connect with you and learn more about what you're working on, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, you can find me at Amber R. Field. So that's 2 R's, FIELD.com. I blog there and you can reach out there as well. You can find me on LinkedIn. And that first book that I have out is called Agile Discovery and Delivery. And so if you are someone who works adjacent to a software team and you have always wanted to know how they work in a very non-technical way, that's a great book. You can find that anywhere books are sold.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for listening to C-Suite Secrets. If you have found today's conversation as valuable as I have, be sure to hit that like and follow button and share with somebody else who's building a business. If you want more tips on how to grow between episodes, you can find us on Facebook at C-Suite Insiders, or you can reach out on Instagram at Heather Parsons Official. Until next time, keep growing, and remember, you don't have to do this alone.